and fall. Psalm 17 is where we were last week. It's where we'll be this week. And just sort of continue picking up where we left off. So now, let's see, record. What is wrong here? I'm sorry, Daryl. Let me try this again. I don't know why this isn't. Okay, let's try it now. Okay. Now we're good. I'm good. Okay. So Psalm 17 is where we left off last week. You know, you may remember we had 2 weeks of being in the auditorium, and then we came back with Psalms, faith as seen in the Psalms, and we talked a little bit more from a introductory perspective, foundational perspective a couple of weeks ago and again last week before we got into the psalm. But since we've already gotten into the psalm, no more foundational thing needed, at least on this particular psalm. So last week we looked at certain words in the first few verses of Psalm 17. Some translations will say in the very first verse, "Hear a just cry." So we talked about, or a just cause, rather, a just cause. Here's someone with confidence about the life he has been trying to live, not with perfection. He'll write in a different psalm, "For I know my sins, they're ever before me." So he's not writing with the confidence of somebody that's too confident, cocky in his own goodness, that sort of thing, overconfident. But he is writing with a felt certainty of his desire, the desire of his pursuit of God, and though he's human and will falter from time to time, that is that's his desire and his effort. He wants it to be his effort. Hear a just cause. Attend to my cry. We talked about faith related to the word cry. That faith does not demand that. Well, first, it's possible to be faithful. Let's start with that. 2 weeks ago on Sunday, 2 Sundays ago, we were talking about being better. We were talking about improvement. It was your typical Sunday, first Sunday of the year, New Year's resolution type of sermon, was the pursuit. And we were saying, listen, it's possible to not to be perfect, but it is possible to do well. It's possible to do better. And really, the only way the Christian gets better, stronger in his faith, less likely to be, here's an old way of putting it, old phrase in the King James, for example, the sin that so easily besets us. In other words, the one that keeps coming. This is my problem. Satan knows how to attack and where to attack, why to attack, and he knows me. And this is the besetting sin for me. This is the unfortunate, reoccurring too often, or at least really my challenge thing. But the only way we get better is incrementally. betterment in anything, it's no different spiritually, does not come overnight. We are an instant gratification people. Living in the time in which we live, in the place in which we live, the advancements that we have had, which have allowed us to have certain things gratified and met quicker than earlier generations could do or know, has not helped us spiritually. In fact, that was the summer series topic that I was given here 5 or 6 years ago. You got to remember the exact title. I think I can that they gave me, but they gave me a subject which was rooted in delayed versus instant gratification. And the gist of the lesson was the gratification which is delayed is more gratifying. That which seems better here, instant, is short-lived. And not as deep in its gratification. And so the only way we get better is incrementally, even though we're an instant gratification people and we want things to, nowadays we come out of a surgery that was outpatient that 40 years ago was 3 days in the hospital. And it's outpatient now. And so I want to heal that quickly from a bad back. I want to heal that quickly from COVID. I want to heal that quickly from whatever it is. And I can't, it's been 2 days. And if you say that when you're 20, your 80-year-old grandmother may go, really? It's been 2 days? You're wondering why you're not better after 2 days? And they may say, let me tell you about how long that would have taken when I was your age. Or they may say, let me tell you how long it would take even today if you were my age. Because you heal quick, you don't heal as quickly at 80 as you did at 25, right? And so we're an instant gratification people, and it hurts us spiritually. But growth comes incrementally. Growth in faith comes, it's a series of constant choices. Day after day after day after day. It's a series of regular choices, regular interactions, regular pursuits, and the regular refusal of other things, which would impact and stunt that growth. So that's a challenge in faith because I want to go 0 to 60 like the car commercial. I want to go 0 to 60 in 3.2 seconds. And that's just not the way spiritual growth happens. And so last week, looking at the first couple of verses here at Just Cause, attend to my cry, it is possible to do well, and that's important to know. I can have a just cause and consider myself faithful. I talked about how God called Job blameless and upright. But it's also possible for me to be a faithful person and feel extreme weakness. Attend to my cry. It's not inherently weak in faith to have struggle. We talked a lot about that last week. Give ear to my prayer, which is not from deceitful lips. Let my vindication come from your presence. You hear the confidence. Now he is placing this upon God, that the vindication is based on what the Lord thinks about his situation, not what he thinks about his situation. He's still giving God's proper place to God. He's not trying to take that. But there is a confident voice in verse 2 and verse 3. Let your eyes look on the things that are upright. You've tested me. You've visited me in the night. You've tried me and have found nothing. We talked last week about how that should not sound like a cocky faith. That it's possible to believe yourself to be faithful. And so I've purposed, still in verse 3, close of verse 3, I've purposed that my mouth shall not transgress. Verse 4, concerning the works of men, by the word of your lips I have kept away from the paths of the destroyer. Uphold my steps in your paths, that my footsteps may not slip. So here's what he recognizes in verse 4 and 5. Do you see in verse 4 and 5? I think I see it there. Do you see in verse 4 and 5 a brilliant, balanced combination of two things that have to go together, and especially one side of the equation has to be there in faith, but that they can live together. These two things can live together. In verse 4, I have kept away from the paths of the destroyer. And the beginning of verse 5, uphold my steps. Two things that can live together is and must, and for continued faith, I must recognize that what I have been doing can be snuffed out and I can be overtaken tomorrow. You see that? The last thing said in verse 4, but the first thing said in verse 5, and you say, that doesn't seem to go together. Oh, it has to. It does go together. When he's talking about himself in verse 4, again with this confidence, he immediately begins in verse 5 with, but if that's going to be true about me tomorrow, or in my tomorrows, then I'm going to need you. So faith can recognize the fact that I feel like I have been giving my best effort. I feel like I'm your man. I feel like I'm doing or have done well, or at least attempted to do well. Again, not with perfection. I feel like I have, but if I'm going to do well tomorrow, and for the tomorrows still down the road, I'm going to need you to uphold my steps in your paths, that my footsteps may not slip. That they still might not. They'll still be where they should be. My feet should still be where they should be. Or will still be where they should be. So I see that. I saw that and thought of that this afternoon. The close of verse 4 and the beginning of verse 5 may seem like they don't go together, but no, they can. Because again, it's possible to believe myself to be. Faith is not about sitting in sackcloth and ashes all day, every day. A faithful person is not somebody, for I know my sin that's ever before me. David would write that. I mean, you look at Psalm 51, and what David, we'll be looking at Psalm 51 in great detail here in a couple of weeks. But he's got a confidence, but that confidence doesn't mean he has no recognition of what he's going to need to remain as he wants to remain. Verse 6, I have called upon you, for you will hear me, O God. Incline your ear to me and hear my speech. Now, there's a sentence in verse 6 that gives great praise and honor and glory to God. Which sentence is it? Well, all of them do, but what do you think I'm talking about? Verse 6. Which sentence gives great praise and honor to God? Let me read it again. I have called upon you, for you will hear me, O God. Incline your ear to me and hear my speech. Okay, one's a statement about himself, who he's been, what he's done. The closing two phrases are about what he needs done. The middle, for you will hear me, O God. That's a recognition of the separation and the difference between him and God. For you will hear me. That's a confidence in God. So, the man after God's own heart, right? This is a Psalm of David. The man after God's own heart is the man who can be confident in his faithful effort, assured of his faithful effort, and yet still, in fact, if he's correct in his faithful effort, he will have and never lose. He'll have constant recognition of the difference in God and man, God's abilities and man's abilities. For you will hear me. Sometimes when I offer prayer personally, privately, just myself, by the way, let me say this. I don't always use that phrase, but I'd like to use that phrase. I use it sometimes, and I just used it now. When I offer prayer. Normally, I probably would just say when I pray. Sometimes you might say when I say a prayer. That's okay because I know what somebody means. I've said that. You know, that's. I do want to point out that our prayer lives will be better if we'd stop saying prayers and start praying prayers, and even better, offering prayers. That's a different posture. It's a different mindset, spiritual posture. It's a different mindset. It's a different thing. It doesn't take what you see Jesus doing in the garden prior to going to Calvary. It doesn't take that to say a prayer. That was an offered prayer. And there's a difference. So back to verse 6, I have called on you, for you will hear me, O God. I say sometimes in a public, because I say it privately, but I also sometimes say this publicly, like maybe in a public prayer on a Sunday before the congregation. We need to be reminded that God hears us, but He doesn't just hear us because He's God in terms of His omnipresence. Sees all, hears all, knows all, that kind. That's not the only reason that He hears us. It's not because He can. You know, why'd you climb that mountain? Because it was there. You've heard that? God doesn't hear me simply because He can. He hears me because He wants to. That's a difference that makes a big difference. There is a confidence here in David when he says in verse 6, "For you will hear me." He's saying something about his belief about God's desire to hear him. It's not you'll hear me because you're God and you hear everything. Who helps us when we need somebody to talk to? The people who can audibly hear me, or the people who are listening to me? See, there's a difference. You can sit in an office with somebody and pour your heart out, and they can audibly hear you, and it doesn't mean they're hearing you. You understand what I'm saying? God doesn't hear him simply because He can. He hears him because He wants to. We've got a couple of passages of Scripture relating to prayer to God that say this, but one that you're familiar with. The eyes of the Lord are upon the righteous, and His ear is attentive to their prayer. Attentive is different from, well, He just happens to be in the room because God's always in the room. Attentive is different from presence. And so faith, the faith of David in Psalm 17 says something about God that is beyond just the fact that He can hear Him. It's about, I know that you are listening. And I know you're listening not just because you're in the room and can audibly hear. I know you're listening not just because, okay, go ahead. What is it? You ever had felt that response from somebody? a child to a parent, a spouse to to the other spouse, a boss to an employee, even a friend to a friend, somebody in the church, where you just let me. I need to say this. And somebody goes, okay, go ahead. Okay, I'm going to tolerate. I'm going to be quiet, and I'm going to let you speak. That's not what David's talking about. He's talking to a God that he believes desires to hear him. And he says, the eyes of the Lord are on the righteous, and his ears are attentive to their prayer. There's something wrong with considering myself to be a faithful person and believing or having trouble with the belief that God actually wants to hear me. Those two things have to go together. Or it's not the faith that God expects us to be able to reach or grow toward. Incline your ear to me, there's the plea, incline your ear to me and hear my speech. Show your marvelous loving kindness by your right hand, O you who save those who trust in you. By the way, this is middle of verse 7 is another statement where, as confident as David is in attempting to be a man of faith, a person of faith, pursuing God, staying with God, as confident as he is, and you can see the confidence again in these earlier verses that we've already looked at. Middle of verse 7, another statement that he hasn't lost sense of who his salvation is in, and the only hope for his salvation. O you who save those who trust in you. He knows he can't save himself, and he knows the continued trust in God, a walk of faith, is necessary for that to happen. So there's a balance here. You see the balance of the faith of David? He believes it's possible to do well. He believes it's okay to think and even say before God, I feel like I've been doing well. While still understanding he's got to continue to do well, and his only hope in doing well is back in his God. Verse 7, close verse 7. From those who rise up against them. I'm sorry, that's the last phrase. That would have been a bad place to cut off. Should have finished the verse earlier. O you who save those who trust in you, from those who rise up against them. Keep me as the apple of your eye. Hide me under the shadow of your wings. Now here's a confident man. And this is going to be King David, right? Here's a confident man, a man of leadership, a man ultimately is going to be called a man after God's own heart. And he says, hide me. Tuck me. You know the song we sing? We don't sing it a lot, but it's Hide Me Away, O Lord. Love that song. And there's different phrases in I guess we call it the verse. And then you kind of, I don't know if it's the chorus or whatever, but it's toward the close of each stanza of, in the day of trouble, neath the shadow of your wings, hide me away, O Lord. Okay, faith can be confident, faith can be strong, but it's not without faith recognizing and pleading, hide me. And frankly, that's what makes faith strong. The recognition of the need to be hidden, and where the only place to be hidden and not found is in the shadow of His wing, neath His wing. That is strong faith. So, strong faith recognizes dependency. That's, I think, the point when I look at verse 8. The plea to hide me under the shadow of your wings. Why is David a man of strong faith? Because he recognizes, hey, I think I'm pursuing well on most days. Again, he would never, look at something. He knows his sin. But you see the confidence in who He is in the early part of the chapter, but then you also see Him say, hide me under the shadow of your wings. I think where David knows faith is strong is in the shadow of the wings, instead of in himself, in his own goodness. Verse 9, from the wicked who oppress me. In other words, hide me. He's still in this hide me thing at the close of verse 8. Now verse 9, hide me why? Hide me where? Hide me from whom? Hide me from the wicked who oppress me, from my deadly enemies who surround me. Faith, a faith pursuit that will work, a faith pursuit that will be strong, is a faith pursuit that recognizes the enemy exists, but not just that he exists, but that he is pursuing. Not that just he is pursuing, but that if he catches up with you, he wants to totally destroy you. Do you see the incremental issue there? It's one thing to say, okay, New Testament teaches what? We have an adversary. What's he doing? He prowls. What's he prowl like? Roaring lion, right? Well, and after the lion is brought out there in the verse, what's after the comma? Seeking to devour. Devour is not toying with. Devour is not toying with me just because he can and because he gets a kick out of it, like somebody picking on somebody on the playground. Scripture gives the devil his due. And he suggests we do as well. That we have a healthy dose of fear about his reality and about what and about the reality not just of his existence, but about his pursuit. And that when he pursues, if he catches, his desire is destruction, not messing with you, not just irritating you, not throwing a punch and walking away. So, David, he said in the close of the second part of verse 8, hide me under the shadow of your wings. Why? What's all this about? What's this plea about? From the wicked who oppress me, from my deadly enemies who surround me. Faith has to recognize the severity of the pursuit. If I don't believe the pursuit is severe, or the end result of that pursuit is severe, do I really need a strong faith? I can handle it. I can handle it. That mentality comes from an underestimation of my enemy. I could ask the question in a room of guys, well, women too, I guess, but it make more sense to ask it in a room of guys to say, especially several years ago. Now, if I asked it today and there were guys that were 25 in the room, it might not land. But if I asked Daryl, if I asked Wes, let's say, hey, if it wasn't for a payday, a handsome payday, let's say there's no pay. It's just ego. That's all. You have any interest in, let's say 20 years ago, so you have any interest in spending 5 minutes in the ring with Mike Tyson? Daryl says he doesn't. He's shaking his head no. I'm going to tell you what I believe is crucial now more than ever, but it's all, I hate to say that because my next statement is, but it's always been this crucial. So I don't know if you can properly merge those two statements, but most parents will know what I mean, right? When I say now more than ever, I certainly believe it's always been this crucial. We've got to, when we talk about faith to our young people, we've got to make sure there is no possible way, as far as it depends on us, that they do not underestimate their adversary. Have you heard the phrase, sin takes you farther than you want to go, keeps you longer than you want to stay, and costs you more than you can pay or than you want to pay? We have got to. I don't want us to just pound a faith into our young people, into the church, that has everybody living in fear, because that removes, I have confidence in my Savior, the promises of my Savior to give me what I need to fight temptation, give me what I need for this support, and to get through tough situations and so on. 1 Corinthians 10:13, no temptation has overtaken you, but such is common to man. But God is faithful. He will not allow you to be tempted above that which you can bear, and when tempted will provide a way of escape. So I don't want us to remove that from faith, and as we talk to young people. But I don't want us to ever fail, to remind not just young people, but I'm honing in on that tonight, but to remind each other of the danger, the severe danger of underestimating your adversary. Because if he catches you, his desire is total destruction, not just kind of messing with you. So David says, a person of faith wants to hide there, is ask for protection. Verse 10, they have closed up their fat hearts. With their mouths they speak proudly. By the way, look at verse 10. Does anybody have a phrase, a different wording in the first part of verse 10? Somebody read me what you got.
They have closed their unfeeling heart. With their mouth they speak proudly.
Unfeeling heart. Okay. What else has somebody got?
They close their hearts to pity.
They've closed their hearts to pity.
They've closed up their fat hearts.
Yeah, fat. It just sounds like, I don't know, it just sounds funny to me. It just sounds like something your rival would say on the playground. You shut your fat heart. You know? That's what that sounds like. You know, they've closed up their fat hearts, unfeeling hearts. Kaylin, what'd you say?
They close their hearts to pity.
Close their hearts to pity. Callous. With their mouths they speak proudly. They have now surrounded us in our steps. They have set their eyes crouching down to the earth. Verse 10 and 11, reading that reminds me, this is an entire group of people that is in our society, our culture, our time, our country, our city, and all over the world today. Do you see in verse 10 and 11, do you see a description of a group that has incredible pride in themselves and cockiness and patting you on the head about your faith in God, and they're ready to pounce? Close of verse 11. As a lion is eager to tear his prey, and like a young lion lurking in secret places. Excuse me. Arise, O Lord, confront him, cast him down. Now, who's him? Well, him is, he's using a personal pronoun. He's using a person to represent, one, an adversary, but also those that walk according to the adversary. Those that stand opposed to the faith David is trying to hold. Second thing that I'm real serious about in this time, and especially with young people, that I think connects to what I was saying earlier about, number one, we cannot let them underestimate the adversary and what he's trying to do. But number two, that we are surrounded by a people that are, hear how I mean this. I think you'll know how I mean this and not how I don't necessarily mean this. That are possessed by Satan. Now, when I say possessed, don't think about the movie The Exorcist or something like that. That's not what I mean. When I say possessed by, I mean he has them. And I don't mean he has them to the point, I mean, this will be true with some. I don't mean he has them to the point like that awful thing the other day, a couple of weeks ago now, and it's been all over national news, and thank goodness, assuming things hold true like we think they will, it looks like they've got him. But the guy that did the grisly murders in Idaho, people that will just do that. People that will find an elderly person in the subway in New York and just beat them to a pulp. Groups of 4 and 5 young guys on the street that will find an 80-year-old and pummel them on the street for no reason whatsoever to take the $17 that they had. I don't mean, those people are out there. That's not what I mean when I say possessed. I just mean he's got them of the flesh and of the world. That's all I mean. He's got them. Right now, he's got them. And we are surrounded by people, not that are people that, I'm not talking about people that necessarily condone some of the awful acts I just talked about, or would carry those acts out themselves. I'm not talking about that. That's a whole nother, I'm just saying he has their hearts because they think it's awfully cute and awfully quaint, the way we talk, the things about which we talk, the fear we have of sin, the respect we have for an adversary, the concern we have for living for God. That's cute to them. We're surrounded by that in a society. And there's a plea in verse 13, arise, confront him and cast him down. Confront him, he uses a pronoun here in a person to stand for a mindset. Because that's who it's coming from. It does go back to a being. It goes back to the being who has them. He has their hearts. Deliver my life, this is the close of verse 13, deliver my life from the wicked with your sword. In verse 13, does anybody have at the close of verse 13, deliver my life from the wicked with your sword? Does anybody have any other phrase that references how God can deliver? Is it sword or what do you got? Sword. Most of you have sword? Okay. What does that suggest from David? Here's faith played out verbally. The confidence that God has all he needs himself to destroy. I'm sorry. You ever swallow wrong and it goes down your windpipe and you cough for 20 minutes? I didn't used to do that, and I started doing it 5 years ago, and it's just ever increasing. Like, why do I swallow down my windpipe all the time? So there is a recognition. Faith has to have a recognition of full confidence that the one you're asking can deliver, and he can deliver because he's got everything necessary in him to deliver with, and that what he possesses is stronger than anything else that, let me just word it this way. The size of his sword makes the power of the adversary who we have been greatly warned about come to ruin, come to nothing. Confidence that David is speaking of is not in himself. Deliver me with your sword. You're the one you're the only one. You're the one that's got, that's another song, the chorus. You're the one, you're the only one. You're the one that has the sword. And so faith lives in a recognition of God's ability to protect and destroy himself. With your hand from men, O Lord. From men, that's an interesting change in verse, because he said, deliver my life from the wicked with your sword, with your hand from men. It's really a continuation of the same thought, but it starts a different verse, at least in the New King James. So deliver, by the way, that's a side note, has nothing to do with the lesson, but I want to say it. Always remember, this is another reason that we need to look at the text in context. Always remember that man divided the Bible into chapters and verses. The inspiration was not the division of chapters and verses. Okay? A group of people, translators, they got together, and publishers, they get together and they do that. Okay? Where does the break seem to be? So always study things in context. Go a verse or two above and a verse or two below and make sure you get the full thought. This is an example, by the way, as we close verse 13 and get into verse 14. So let me go back to the close of verse 13. Deliver my life from the wicked with your sword, with your hand from men, O Lord. Now, see, that's verse 14. From men of the world who have their portion in this life, and whose belly you fill with your hidden treasure. They are satisfied with children, and leave the rest of their possession for their babes. As for me, I will see your face in righteousness. I shall be satisfied when I awake in your likeness. I think verse 15, the last verse, as it relates to faith, the last verse, and maybe, well, why shouldn't I feel this way? Of course. I mean, again, by inspiration of God. So, of course, it would wrap up correctly and powerfully. But I can't imagine this chapter and the angle that he takes, the pursuit of his prayer, basically, wrapping up any better than this. As for me, remember, we're talking about faith as seen in the Psalms. As for me, number one, I will see your face in righteousness. Not I hope to, not if you allow me to, not because of the comparative grade I would get against other people, not my goodness. I will see. Does that sound like David anywhere else? And I will. Can you think of a psalm where he says, and I will? There's several, but there's one that's famous. Famous psalm. Wraps up. 23rd psalm. Wraps up the same way. And I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Lesson for another time, but I've said it. I've probably said it too much, but I'll just say it. I say it a lot. I do not like seeing longtime Christians still sounding like they're this way in their salvation. That's not humility. Somebody may want to believe it and even intend it. Intend it as humility. Or say, I just hope. Because they're and what they're thinking maybe is, because I know my sin that's ever before me. Just like that, okay? That's all their meaning is, I just know I haven't always been what I should have been. The Lord that made me knew that. The Lord that promised me knew that and still said what He said, still promised what He promised. So the statement, it's dangerous where I don't realize I'm making a statement potentially about doubt. It's really is it a doubt that God keeps His promises? It's okay to live in faith, and it's not unfaithful to say, I am saved. Now recognize you got to stay saved, right? Nobody that knows me thinks I believe in a once saved, always saved position. But it's okay to say I'm saved. It's okay to say I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Because it's understood that is by staying with Him. So, it wraps up, I will see your face in righteousness. And then I shall be satisfied. And look at the expectation in the last phrase. Full expectation. I shall be satisfied when I awake in your likeness. You're all I need. I'll be fully satisfied pursuing your likeness. I'll be fully satisfied pursuing your likeness. And I won't need anything else. That whole chapter is the balance of faith. That whole chapter screams the balance that we need in faith. And if I get to see David one day, I'll say, good job, David. Good job on that psalm, right? Anybody have anything they need to ask or say? It's time to be done.
If your back feels better, sir.